Hello and welcome to another edition of BCR Webcasting. Today I'm joined by Igor Zaks. Igor is president of Tenzor. Tenzor is a consultancy firm focusing on trade finance. Igor's well known in the sector and has been involved in the sector for many, many years, both in terms of operational activities, but also within large corporates and practitioners, but also as a consultant observing and advising on an international basis on the industry. Igor, welcome. Igor, today we're talking about a study that you've published recently in association with BCR, and this is a comparative study comparing let's first of all give the title of the study. It's a Global Trade Receivables Financing Penetration Study 2006 versus 2024. So you performed a study in 2006 and you've made a comparison, or you've done another study in 2024 and you're comparing the two situations. Let me ask you, Igor, why did you do it in the first place in 2006? What did you want to achieve there?
Thank you, Michael, for introduction. It's an interesting question that was puzzling me at the time about the industry. It's still puzzling me. When you look at any type of a product, you look at total addressable market and you look at penetration. So if you want to sell something, you look what the size of the market and then how much of this market you have. And then if there are substitute products, if there are other products, you look how it's split between different things addressing the same market. And surprisingly, nobody take a look at receivable finance products in this way. So what I want to understand at the time was first, what is the size of the market? How much receivables outstanding in the economy? Because we see it about some securities, shares, loans, but the receivables people were not really focused on this. And the data were, broadly speaking, available direct or indirect. So in US, for example, it's traced through Federal Reserve. In Europe, there was a way to estimate from Eurostat data, whatever. So we know exactly how much is outstanding receivables in the economy. Now, what do you do with receivables? You can provide financing against them in various forms. So, for example, at the time, there was a huge BCP market, so people were securitizing receivables. There is now, and there was at the time, factoring market. There is a asset-based lending market. Supply chain finance, we were just writing the rulebook. I mean, you remember the time, we were among people who started the product. So what we wanted to see is, here is the size of the market, that's receivables, that's what's outstanding in the economy, and what inside this market is done by different type of products. That was the original idea.
How does it differ from what FCI are producing? They're focusing more on volume, are they?
FCI is looking at the size of their product. So they're looking how much factoring is done, how much turnover is going through it, things like it, as they do as industry association. And we use that data. We are not trying to do their job for them. They know, they get their members reporting to them. They know exactly what amounts are going through. What we try to do, we try to address different markets, because FCI looking at factoring. So, for example, at the time, rating agencies get the data about content of ABCP conduits, what receivables were sitting in it. There are various types of studies, looking at the ABL market, at other ones. But we also want to compare it with economic data. We want to understand how it actually relates to what's outstanding, what's the total market. Because at the end of the day, you cannot finance something that doesn't exist. So there should be a receivable, there should be people buying and selling goods, there should be receivables in the economy. And they may be financed, may not be financed, insured, not insured, but they need to exist in the first place. Unlike, obviously, in recent cases when people were very successful financing non-existent receivables, but in normal circumstances, we are saying that that's supposed to exist.
Okay, so let's jump to what you did in 2024. And presumably you did a similar study in 2024, and then you compared what happened in 2006 you compared that with what you discovered in 2024. Is that right?
Yes. So what we try to do, we try to use a consistent methodology. We made a couple updates to what we were doing in the original study. First, we did not look at asset-based lending in the original study, and the reason we didn't look at this, we look at those that were sold, and asset-based lending is a secured lending. But from perspective now, we thought that it's good also to put there because that's a form of financing, even it doesn't include the sale of the asset. The second thing, the supply chain finance was very, very early emerging product in 2006. It just were, a couple of players. We were one of them that were, trying to start the product. Today, it's a well-established market with significant volumes and more there with a mandatory disclosure under SC 40550 that was introduced a couple of years ago in 2023, if I remember correctly. So what we get a little bit more data points. We get continuing of series that we get. So Federal Reserve, for example, still reports the outstanding receivables in U.S. economy. There are various type of things. So what we try to do, we try to first get whatever new data sources we have to make more precise. But second, most important, to compare. Now, and again, we also want to see what happened and what lessons can be learned from what happened. So what we see that some markets increased, some markets almost disappeared, some markets emerged, and there are reasons for doing it. And this sort of shifts, we want to understand how we come there, why we come there, and then what should we expect in the future. And I think that's critical for practitioners to understand the trends.
One of the things that you looked at was the market penetration of credit insurance compared to factoring receivables market penetration. Why did you do that, and what did you discover there?
In the original study, we look at the credit insurance versus factoring, and in the new study we also see a comparison with some other asset classes. Now, and the headline answer is very, very interesting. Credit insurance grew significantly quicker than factoring. Factoring grew, but again, we need to look now at proportion because we get a growth in a denominator, we get a growth in receivable volume, we get the increase in insurance, we get increase in factoring, increase in insurance was quicker. So if you look, for example, at European data, the proportion of exposure that is factored versus credit insurance in 2006 was 11.6%. The latest data that we get 2024 was 8.7%. So while factoring volumes are growing, they're not growing as fast as the insurance volumes are growing. That's the European data. That's why the product is prevalent. And that's interesting observation because one of the things we thought in the regional study that if people already pay for risk mitigation and replace an asset that is highly risky, receivable from SME, whatever, with a significantly better asset that is insured, and that have a single A, double A rated insurer that is providing coverage for it, you would expect that it's very rational to finance this asset as much as you can. And what we thought that there will be increase in penetration of financial techniques using the insured assets. What we see is that if this increase happened, it didn't happen in factoring. So in factoring, there is increase in absolute volumes, and factoring is doing very well as an industry, but it's not going as quickly as the insurance one. Now, we can argue that there is a growth in other segments and insurance is reutilized in other segments. And for example, There are insurance programs that are covering various bank products. Obviously, ABL is a big user of the insurance and things like it. But again, it's interesting because insurance is the biggest storage of risk capacity for the receivables, and it's interesting to see through which channels this capacity is utilized.
Igor, who do you think is going to be using this report, and who do you think is going to get the most value out of it?
To me, anybody who is using receivables as the core asset in the product should look at this type of study. Because again, you get, as in any market, when you go there, you need to look at the total market size, and you need to look what are your risk of substitution and how it's going between different products. So if you are in ABL, if you're in securitization, if you're in factoring, if you're in insurance, if you are touching this asset class through whatever way, that's the two questions you need to know. So, for example, we see that it used to be a large ABCP market or large trade receivable proportion ABCP markets went down. Where did the need disappear? No. Total volume is still around 16%. It is financing of the receivables. It shifted. So the shifts are important. Why did it happen? Again, you can ask the question. So, for example, there was a regulatory and rating agency pressure on securitization, and we saw this. And there was a litigation around it and things like it. That's what we saw in the previous crisis. Surprise, surprise, we see similar trends now related to other products. So if you look at the green CO, if you look at First Brand, or if you look at other situations, and you look at the reactions of rating agencies, litigation, whatever, we get also the pressure there. It's very important, in addition to understanding the market size and penetration and things like it, to see what's driving the shifts and what's driving the shifts from to nowhere, or what's driving the shifts to another product. So, for example, why supply chain finance become much more prevalent now? What was the reason? In 2000, and by the way, that's what I was writing at the time in a completely different publication. We were looking at what happened to a BCP market. If you look at receivables, there were dilution risks, there were all the different things that people try to deal through effective or statistical modeling. And they found that very difficult to predict. So what happened, people start making a structural shift. So if your risk is fraud, if your risk is dilutions, let's do a product that will reduce this risk significantly. Let's get the buyer confirmation, things like it. That's how supply chain finance came to play. And what we saw, supply chain finance actually took a lot of liquidity that was left by other segments. What we see now is that some of the products marketed as supply chain finance do not really address this risk. So again, it's very like, if we know the past, we know the future, or we have a good idea how to better see what can happen in the future.
In fact, you describe it in your report as a structural revolution. When comparing the two periods. So that's look, I found this very interesting reading, Igor, and I think anybody involved, as you said, in the receivables, payables, finance space should also find it fascinating reading. It's available from our website, www.bcrpub.com. And Igor, thank you very much for your time today in talking about your study. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.